It's only March, but the cycling season is already in full swing. Lance Armstrong thrust the sport back into the limelight with his first race back at the Tour Down Under. The momentum carried over to the Amgen Tour of California, where record crowds witnessed Levi Leipheimer take the three-peat. Now the focus switches to France, where the peloton lines up for a week-long battle at Paris-Nice. One rider with extra motivation is Alberto Contador of Team Astana. The Spaniard won this event in 2007, but wasn't allowed back last year. Australia's Tour de France hopeful Cadel Evans will use this race to test his early season legs. Team Saxo Bank will look to Frank Schleck to continue his good form from California. And Garmin Slipstream have a two-pronged attack with David Miller and Christian van der Velde hoping to land on the podium. It's all part of the epic cycle as the 67th edition of Paris-Nice is next here on Versus. The international cycling season has been underway for 2 months now, with the Tour Down Under in Australia and, of course, the Amgen Tour of California last month. But what I always regard as the real start of the European campaign is Paris-Nice, and that's about to start very shortly with a long 9.3-kilometre individual time trial. Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Sherwen. Alongside me is Bob Roll, and this certainly is, for everybody, the season started, because this is where all of the big names come out for the first time. We're looking at a race of 8 stages, starting in Amilly outside of Paris, finishing in Nice, 778 miles, Bob, but a mixed bag, of course.
One time trial to start things off today. 2 flat stages, a rolling stage, but look at that, 4 mountain stages. This is going to be a very tough week of racing.
A very tough week of racing indeed. In fact, some rather interesting rides down towards the end, because it really is a very difficult race route that we have in line for the riders before they get down to Nice. A lot of big names, Bob, coming out here for the first time on the European campaign, and it's nice to see, of course, the man that we all expect to do well, Alberto Contador, making a comeback to France. He hasn't raced here since 2007. He'll be challenged maybe by Cadel Evans, the man who finished second in the Tour de France last year, and of course Frank Schleck, always a good man at the start of the year.
Frank Schleck coming off a stage win at the Tour of California. David Miller and Christian van der Velde from Garmin, and Rinaldo Nocentini, also a stage winner at the Tour of California. He was second in this race last year, and he's looking to go 1 place better in this year's Paris-Nice.
He already showed us he had great form in the Amgen Tour of California, but a number of riders and a number of teams not present here. Of course, Fuji Servetto not being invited because of the ongoing discussion about whether or not teams are going to comply to the biological passport.
Fuji Servetto not invited. They were used to be called Saunier Duval, and of course they had a big prang up with the ASO last year in the Tour de France with Ricardo Rico.
One man not here either. Just watch this. This happened in the Amgen Tour of California. Ouch, I would have to say, because there is Levi Leipheimer, the man who went on to win the Amgen Tour of California, crossing wheels with Lance Armstrong, going down rather hard. After he'd won the race, Bob, they found out that he actually had a slight fracture.
Nor will Lance Armstrong be here. He was never scheduled to do Paris-Nice this year. David Robillon, the defending champion, not here either. His team's chosen to do a smaller stage race in Italy. Robert Hasink, the Rabobank rider who had a great Paris-Nice last year, non-starter as well.
The definition of a prologue time trial is it must not exceed 8 kilometres. Today's route, Bob, at 9.3 kilometres makes it into a proper stage. A very long stage, and I think going to be a slightly different result to last year's time trial.
Should be a very tough time trial for the riders. It's just over 9 kilometres, not a prologue. And here's your profile. Very flat, but also a lot of twists and turns out there. It's going to be a very technical test for the riders today. 9.3 clicks, and there's the intermediate time check. We'll be keeping a close eye on that at 5.3 kilometres.
That's very important, that fact that you raised there, Bob, that it is 9.3 kilometres. The men that want to win this bike race overall, like Alberto Contador, they've got to be very careful that they don't lose any time on a day like this. But it's a day really for specialists.
The specialists in the time trial discipline include this man, David Miller from the Garmin squad, homegrown American team. He's one of the very best in the time trial, and he's based his season of doing a great ride in stage number 1 of Paris-Nice Gustav Larsson, another tough time trialist. He's from Sweden. He's on Saxo Bank, and they seem to be chock full of specialists in the time trial. He did a great time trial in Solvang in the Tour of California just a couple of weeks ago, and he's looking to continue that success. And of course, don't forget Bradley Wiggins. Used to be on High Road. Now he's gone over to the Garmin team, and he would want to do a good prologue as well. He's a specialist in this discipline.
He certainly is a specialist at the individual time trials, and I have to say that we've got to look at one or two other riders. Last year, Danny Pate was 6th in this prologue, Jens Voigt was 11th, and Markel Irizar was in 2nd place. However, on that occasion, it was only a 5-kilometer individual time trial, and I have to feel that these men are likely to be dark horses. Men will have to keep a close eye on. So going down to the action, the leader of the time trial at the moment is Sylvain Chavanel of France with a time of 11 minutes and 24 seconds. Just coming into the finishing line, though, is Romain Felu. He's going to finish inside of the top 51 there, Bob. Not a great time by him. I have to say the weather conditions are certainly not great.
Abysmal weather for the riders so far today. Heavy rain falling. Felu, as you recall, yellow jersey in the Tour de France last year for a day. And here we see Petrov coming to the finish line on a brand new team this year, and that is the Katusha squad, and they've had a great start to the season. A
great ride for him. He's in fact just threatening the time there of Kevin Van Impe, and in fact he's gone better than that time of Kevin Van Impe, 11 minutes and 29 seconds.
Leader currently, Sylvain Chavanel, and he set the fastest time a little bit earlier in the day. There's Petrov through the finish line, and we're seeing a lot of bad weather so far that the riders are facing. You can see how the rain is coming off of the tires, and a miserable day for the riders today so far.
Well, one of the early starters from Garmin Slipstream, in fact, Danny Pate, is holding 18th place at the moment, a time of 11 minutes and 52 seconds. But I think we'll see a bit more of a ride by some of his teammates later on. We're looking down here at Jaroslav Popovic. All of the big names are stacked up towards the end. Cadel Evans, David Miller, Alberto Contador, huge names. I have to say, coming back to this team, Team Astana, Jaroslav Popovic, I think, Bob, is a big loss for Cadel Evans later on in the season.
Well, he was on Lotto last year, a little bit of a troubled relationship with the Lotto squad, and Jaroslav Popovic very glad to be back with Johan Brunel as he guides Alberto Contador through this race. This is one of the best pros in the business. He was thought of as a GC contender for the Grand Tours, the overall to win the yellow jersey in the Tour eventually, but he's become a super domestique for all of his teammates, including Cadel Evans last year, but he'll have to work for Contador and perhaps Lance Armstrong later on in this season.
Well, I have to say, I think he's been really affected, like everybody has in the sport of professional cycling, Bob, by the L factor, the Lance factor. That Team Astana really seems to have changed, and we've seen it already this year at the Tour Down Under in Australia, and of course at the Amgen Tour of California. The people have come out to see the bike race.
Oh, absolutely. The crowds are back. I think that the Lance factor is perhaps doubled the crowds so far in every race that he's done, including the Tour Down Under and, of course, Tour of California. Unbelievable. It was great to see so many people come out and enjoy this great sport. And, of course, you can never discount Lance Armstrong's effect on the sport. And it's great to have him back in bike racing.
Well, the man we're looking at here was the best young rider in the Tour de France a couple of years ago. He was always regarded as a big star. He finished 3rd overall in the Giro d'Italia back in 2003. But I have to say, you're right, Bob. He is really one of the top henchmen for men like Lance Armstrong when we come through to the Tour de France. That rider just coming in there was Juan Oroz of Team Euskaltel. That's not a bad ride for him. 11:54, 3rd best time at the moment.
Two to go, now leading, and that is a good ride by Oroz. Here is back out on the open road. You can see how narrow these streets are. You can see it's a little bit different than the races the riders will face throughout the rest of the week. This is an individual time trial. Each man by himself against the clock, against time, the race of truth. Popovic, very good at this discipline. He's going to try to do a good ride, but Contador needs to do a great ride today. He needs to establish himself as the team leader. A little bit later in the day, he'll be starting. Perhaps the roads will dry out a little bit too for the later starters. Most certainly very soggy for the early starters.
It's always tough because what people don't understand, that although we're looking at 5.3 miles of racing here, Bob, it's really a long day, isn't it, preparing for an individual time trial like this. And that's the difficult thing. That's Monnier coming in there of France, a 3rd best time. We're starting to get faster times coming in, and the crowd there very resemblant to the first 3 days of the Amgen Tour of California, Bob, under the umbrellas.
Oh yes, the first 3 days of the Amgen Tour of California, absolutely miserable and cold. Bit warmer on the outskirts of Paris for the prologue. Popovic giving it everything he's got, trying to set a very fast time and see how that holds up, and that is a good ride so far by Jaroslav Popovic.
Well, he's down into a very good aerodynamic position there. Popovic out on the individual time trial. So we've now got Paris-Nice Stage 1 right underway, but the big guns come right down towards the end. Frank Schleck from Luxembourg. David Miller will be coming out as well to prove that he's a great individual time trialist. And of course, the man we're waiting for this year, Alberto Contador. We'll be back. Jaroslav Popovic of Team Astana. Bob here out on the road, riding for Live Strong this year. I have to say, everybody is very motivated about the return to the top end of the sport by Lance Armstrong. But for Jaroslav Popovic, his job in an individual time trial like this is obviously to go out and set a fast time for Alberto Contador to have as a reference point a little bit later on. In the starting gate, the man who I think may dominate the first two stages on the open road, Gert Steegmans.
Gert Steegmans, winner of last year's final stage in the Tour de France, also a couple stages here in Paris-Nice in his career on that new team from Russia, Katusha, and he's wanting to set a little bit of a fast time. He'll have a fairly easy day today. I wouldn't say easy, but he will look for stages further on in Paris-Nice, the flat stages for the sprinters.
I've got to say, there's not a lot for the sprinters in this year's Paris-Nice, because once we get down through the middle of France, down towards Saint-Etienne, down towards Vichy, and then of course through the Alpes-Maritimes, it really is a very tough Paris-Nice this year. That's why I think a lot of those riders have gone away. The time to beat is that of Sylvain Chavanel, and Popovic, although third fastest rider at half distance, Bob, is actually fading, but he should still get himself inside the top 10.
Very nice ride here by Jaroslav Popovic, challenging for the top 5, and he'll come across 6th place. That's a good ride by Popo. He'll also have a chance to look at the course, report back to Contador to come in a little while, and tell him exactly how fast he can go through these very soggy, wet, dangerous corners. Popovic, a good ride, 6th place so far.
Strong man, solid rider, especially in these kind of conditions. The conditions are not great this afternoon in France because the rain has come down. It's been coming down since the early part of the day, and I have to say we're looking at around about 6 degrees Celsius. But it's a long day, isn't it, Bob? We're looking at 9.3 kilometers, 5.5 miles, but it starts very early in the morning for a professional cyclist for a short time trial like this.
Oh, absolutely. You have to put in the same amount of hours no matter what type of discipline it is. You start early, you warm up, you have a good breakfast, you take a little bit of a rest and look at the conditions, get some of the reports from your teammates. Gert Steegmans out on course from Team Katusha. He's trying to get through this prologue without too much difficulty. He'll be looking for the sprint stages in the next couple of days.
Another brand new team on the block. It was formerly Tinkoff Credit Systems last year, but now this is the big Russian team, isn't it? They've got behind a lot of the Russian riders, brought in some great talent like Gert Steegmans, brought across for an awful lot of money away from Tom Bonen. He's had great success so far this season. 2 stage wins already, 1 in the Ruta del Sol, 1 in the race in Mallorca. I think this is going to be the big year for Steegmans.
Steegmans is looking to improve on some of the big wins he's had already. Not necessarily a classics man, but great in the sprint finishes, especially when it's been a long, hard stage race like we saw him do in the Tour de France last year. And here is Javier Florencio from Cervelo out on course.
Well, a couple of years ago, he created a big surprise when he won the big San Sebastian Classic race in the northern part of Spain. He's a rider who I think a lot of people feel could be a great ally in the stage races. Obviously brought in to look after the man Carlos Sastre, who won the Tour de France last year in Bob, what I have to say is still an incredibly dominant style. When he broke away on Alpe d'Huez, everybody looked the other way.
Oh, Sastre was dominant in the Tour de France, won the yellow jersey, kept it all the way, especially in the last time trial. It seemed as if Cadel Evans had it in the bag, but that was not the case, and it turned out to be Carlos Sastre, the best man, and Florencio, now his teammate on Cervelo for this year.
I'm a little surprised, actually, looking at Gert Steegmans here, that the big man, the big sprinter, using this race to prepare. We're now going into the starter case. This is Armel Moinard, and he's a rider from Team Cofidis. A little bit of controversy just running up to the start of Paris-Nice, because this year all of the teams have to pay to support the biological passport, which is a way of monitoring the riders throughout the year, monitoring the athletes throughout the year to make sure that nobody's up to any monkey business. And a number of teams, Bob, hadn't paid before the start of Paris-Nice their contribution to this biological passport. Cofidis was one of them.
Cofidis included in that list of the teams that hadn't yet paid into the biological passport, and they've been allowed to start in Paris-Nice anyways, so that will continue to play out throughout the year. So we see Gert Steegmans through these very rural roads, very narrow, bit technical, some very tight corners, especially when you consider how slippery these roads are.
Well, again, when you look at weather conditions like this, Bob, it's not great, is it? When you wake up in the morning, you pull the curtains to one side, look outside, and you can see it's pouring down with rain, and you know you've got to go and ride for an hour and a half to get yourself warmed up, to get yourself ready, because it's important to have a hot engine when you come down the starting ramp.
I think these days and age that riders have a bigger advantage. They have a canopy set up and some bike trainers that they can put their machines on to warm up in a little bit more controlled environment. I remember in my day we had to go out on the open roads no matter what the weather was like to get ready for any of the time trials. A little bit more difficult than the riders facing today. Here's the standings as we look at Sylvain Chavanel still with the fastest time. Just ahead of Kevin Van Imper, and in third place Sergio Paulino. Let's not forget a teammate there, of course, of Jaroslav Popovic. He's up in third. The epic cycle continues here on Versus. Next Sunday, Alberto Contador leads Team Astana into the 8th and final stage of Paris-Nice. Can he hold off Cadel Evans, Frank Schleck and the rest of the peloton? And on March 29th, the top riders in the world look to conquer the rugged French Ardennes for the 2-day Criterium International. The epic cycle right here on Versus. Just looking at these weather conditions, Bob, and actually just looking at the kind of terrain we're going through, it's very reminiscent of a little bit later on in the year when we do go to the Criterium International. These first races of the season are great indicators. I'm just trying to finish a thought I was having earlier on Gerd Stegmans. I'm surprised that he's come here to prepare for Milan-San Remo, because there are two races concurrently at the start of the season, just leading up to Milan-San Remo. You've got Paris-Nice, which is used by some riders, and of course Tirreno-Adriatico. And it seems to me in recent years the sprinters have tended to opt to go to the Italian race, which is not quite as hilly as this one. Not quite as hilly. Also, generally speaking, the weather is a little bit better. Gerd Stegmans, a tough man from the north, a Belgian rider, and he loves these conditions, and he will be looking forward to all of the classics to come. He is a great favorite for Milano-San Remo in a couple of weeks' time. He certainly is, along with his teammate Robbie McEwen, who's already had a bit of success there. A bit of a surprise, because McEwen for nearly the whole of his career raced for the Lotto team in one form or another, and he too decided to jump ship during the winter transfer season and go across to Team Katusha. We're looking here at Javier Florencio. All of the big names that start at the back end of the field. Nocentini, who will start last this afternoon, was second overall last year. Cadel Evans starts 2 from the end. David Miller starts 4 from the end, and 6 from the end Alberto Contador. And Bob, it's important for Contador now to do well in this, isn't it? He has to ride and make sure he doesn't lose too much time, although he was very dominant in the Algarve time trial, where he blew everybody away and grabbed himself the overall victory. Well, Contador will look at his time against Cadel Evans, against Frank Schleck, against David Miller, some of the other contenders for the overall. As we see Florencio, he just came under the 1 kilometer to go, the red kite, signaling 1,000 meters before the finish line. Of course, he won a huge race, probably the biggest one-day race in Spain, Clásica San Sebastian, and that's a dream for any Spanish rider. And he's come over to the Cervelo team, teammates with Carlos Sastre. This is a solid professional, doing a good job in the prologue so far. He certainly is. You see how he keeps himself a little bit out from the side of the road there. He doesn't want to cut the road corners too much on a day like this, does he, Bob? Because what happens when you go by those fields, especially on a rainy day, is a lot of dirt and a lot of little stones get washed onto the road, and that can create flat tires a little later on. He's now looking to see where the finishing line is going to be. A couple of 100 meters to go for Florencio. Pretty fast time, starting to tumble down the leaderboard. Perhaps looking at a top 20 finish by the time he gets to the finish line. Maybe a little bit further back than that. Yeah, still the time to beat on the finish line is that of Sylvain Chavanel, the Frenchman who set the fastest time. New team for him as well this year, by the way, because Chavanel is riding for Quick Step. 37th time there for Florencio, 11:57. He's still got himself, Bob, inside of the 12-minute mark. A very fast time by Chavanel. He is the big star of French cycling, and he's come over to a Belgian team, and we'll see how he can do. Here is Alexander Kolobnev, one of the Ukrainian riders on Team Saxo Bank. This is a solid professional, also great in the one-day races, and he won some big races last year. A new pro and one of the stars of the future. Well, I always say Team Saxo Bank, which was originally Team CSC, is a scary team at the start of the year. They're always on form. They do a boot camp training during the winter months. They all work together, survive together. When they come out and race events like this, Paris-Nice, Criterium International, they race on block. You could pick any one of Team Saxo Bank as a dangerous rider, can't you? Oh, absolutely. Here's another Astana rider. rider in the start house, and they have a great squad coming to the line this year. This is Aymar Zubeldia. He's been hired by Johan Bernil away from Euskadi, as we see Fothen coming to the finish line. Top 40, not great for Fothen. His brother Marcus Fothen will come in a little bit later, and he'll be looking to do a bit faster than that. Out on the race course, Bouygues, and we did see Aymar Zubeldia in the start house just a few moments ago.
Well, this is Yuri Trofimov riding for the new team, B-Box at Bouygues Telecom, and Bob, I actually don't know what B-Box is.
I think it's ghetto blasters that they make for the French kids now, and they're trying to promote that through the cycling team. Just kidding.
Well, you can see he's got himself a very high cadence here, Trofimov. He's got a solid disc wheel in at the back. He's riding down the central part of the road there to keep away from any chance of having a flat tire, but we are now starting to get ourselves some very fast times. The leader at the finish line is still Sylvain Chavanel with 11 minutes 24 seconds ahead of Kevin Van Impe, and still Sergio Paulino of Team Astana hanging on to third spot. Welcome back now to Paris-Nice Stage 1, and this man is an incredible specialist at the individual time trial, Olympic gold medalist, a world champion on the track in the past, Bradley Wiggins, for the American team Garmin Slipstream. Bob, this is a man we really need to follow.
Bradley Wiggins coming over to Garmin Slipstream. He'll want to do a good ride. This is his first chance to show his team that he is worth the money that they're paying him, and he's going to try to do a great prologue. This is one of the specialists of this event. 9.3 Ks. It should be a perfect distance for Brad Wiggins, and see what he can do for his new squad, Garmin, from the United States.
2 Olympic gold medals in the back pocket. He was brought across to Team Garmin, I think, Bob, to strengthen them up for the team time trial, but maybe a little bit of misunderstanding between him and Mark Cavendish at the Olympic Games last year, because Cavendish was the only man from the Great Britain squad that went to the Olympic Games that didn't get a medal. This man got 2, but he wasn't strong enough for Mark Cavendish felt to support him in his quest to win the Madison.
A bit of a rift developing between Wiggins and Cavendish because of that failure in the Madison at the Olympic Games. Like you said, Paul, one of the very few failures that the British team had.
Stegmans coming into the finish line. A sensible time by Stegmans. Let's not forget that this man is one of the sprinters, and he will be looking for a good time to probably try and grasp the yellow jersey over the next couple of days. Well, Bouygues Telecom, and they're a team who will be aggressive, I'm absolutely certain. But out on course now is Bradley Wiggins, who started this year off by leading the Tour of Qatar for his new team, Team Garmin Slipstream. And as we look here at Yuri Trofimov, he's a rider. Interesting bike there as well, Bob, but very long tubes on that bike. And the UCI, the international governing body, are trying to bring in a rule now to stop the relationship of the tubes to the length of the tube exceeding a 3-to-1. They don't want them riding aeroplane wings, I don't think.
Well, you can see the airfoil there on the seat tube of this machine, and Trofimov coming to the finish line using a pretty small gear. We'll see what his time is. I don't think he'll challenge the leader, Sylvain Chavanel. You can see how his goggles there are fogged up pretty substantially. It makes it kind of hard to negotiate the tight corners out on the race course.
Well, he's had a good start to the season. Not a great start to Paris-Nice. 48th time there for Yuri Trofimov. He actually finished 3rd overall in the Étoile de Bessèges, which was one of those horrible cold races in the south of France in the early part of the year. But this race is completely different. Whatever's happened up until now, Bob, I've always regarded, and I think most people always regard Paris-Nice as being the real start of the season.
This is where you test your form if you're a classic specialist, and if you want to try to win, like a rider like this man, Bradley Wiggins, or of course Alberto Contador, you have to be on storming form to come into the start of the season. I remember Sean Kelly always could send a clear message to the peloton for the classics. He won this race, I believe it was 7 times in his career.
7 times in a row from 1982 to 1988. Now, these are the times that we'll have to see whether or not Bradley Wiggins can challenge. That's the time at the finish, 11:24, but where Chavanel was fastest man at 5.3 kilometers, and that was a time of 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Bob, look at that position. That is a phenomenal position for this man, who's been a 2-time Olympic champion at the individual pursuit, at the team pursuit. He's made to go fast. He's made to go fast out on the open road, a track specialist that learned how to do the individual discipline of time trialing in the pursuit. This is a little bit longer than that at 9.3 Ks, but I think that he's developed his endurance over the years. He was on the
team of Colombia last year, and he had some great results for that squad, including a number of very good results in prologue time trials. But I think he wants to do something very special today in the Paris-Nice prologue.
Well, I think, as you said, it's important when you come across to a new team, you want to show the other guys, I can be a great leader, I can be a top dog on a team like this, which is why I think he'll have an added motivation coming across to the Garmin slipstream. This is Amilly who coming up to the line, a rider from Team Cofidis. You see how quickly the positions slip down when you come into the last 50 meters. He was looking at a top 10 finish about 50 meters ago, and now he's going to be lucky to get himself inside of the top 50. There he's got 42nd, and that's 11 minutes and 58 seconds. But look at the average speed, 46 kilometers an hour. A fair way off the time of Sylvain Chavanel, which is almost 49 kilometers an hour. Here we're looking at Bradley Wiggins. He's out on course, and he's looking to try and rival the top men. Looking through the trees at the start of Paris-Nice, outside the small town of Montargis, we're in the suburb of Amilly for the 9.3 kilometer individual time trial. I'm Paul Sherwen. Alongside me is Bob Roll, and we're looking at Bradley Wiggins on the American team Garmin slipstream. He's looking very fast to me here, Bob. He's got an exceptionally nice bike there. He's got a solid disc wheel at the back, very deep rims at the front. Now, what's the reason really that guys like to have that deep rim on the front wheel and not a solid wheel?
Yeah, that's a very good point. They want to have a little bit of maneuverability on the machine. The disc wheel's very difficult to change directions. If you have a race course with any type of turns in it, you can actually lose time by trying to re-accelerate that wheel that does not want to change direction. And also, they've included a few spokes in the front wheel, but you can see how wide the rim is, and that to aid the aerodynamics. Getting that balance. Also, it depends on the rider's skill a little bit. Some riders much better at maneuvering the machines. And we can see Michael Berry from Canada coming to the finish line. A pretty solid ride there by Michael Berry.
Barry, a man who, in fact, has had a bit of success so far this season and was the winner of the King of the Mountains classification in the Amgen Tour of California. 39th best time for him. But out on the course, we are waiting for Bradley Wiggins to see what kind of a performance he is going to put in. Because I have to say, I think Bradley Wiggins, Bob, has got a bit of responsibility on his shoulders here this afternoon, because he has to ride well in time trials. That's why they've paid him to come across to this squad.
And maybe a bit of a problem here. It looks like Brad.
Corner.
Oh, no, just coming through the corner there. And that is a tricky little corner there, and a little bit of a problem there for Wiggins. It looks like he put the binders on full on. He'll need to accelerate that machine back up to speed to challenge the time of Sylvain Chavanel.
Well, that's what you were saying just a moment ago, Bob. The thing about these bikes are made for speed, to go as fast as possible into a headwind. They're not made for maneuverability, and then you add a little bit of dampness onto the road. They're quite scary to ride.
And I think that the conditions are starting to disintegrate a little bit for the riders, as we see Kolobnev coming to the finish line. Not a time trialing specialist, but a very good one-day rider. He'll be looking to ride very hard. He's had great Paris-Nice results in the past to get ready for the rest of his classics campaign.
Well, he's coming in 51st place there. He's lost himself almost 40 seconds out on the course. There's not too many difficult points on this course, Bob, where you can lose time, but we just did see Bradley Wiggins losing himself probably 4 or 5 seconds with a maneuver like that.
Mirko Lorenzotto out on course from Lamprey, teammates with the great Balan, of course, and the Piccolo Principe, Le Petit Prince. Damiano Cunego not here in Paris-Nice. He'll be in Tirreno Adriatico. And there is Bradley Wiggins, very aerodynamic. See if his time is affected at all by the corners out on the course. And he's chosen the most aerodynamic machine probably that we'll see all year, and that's not the best way. He's maybe motioning to the helicopter there to go off to the side so he doesn't get the big full blast of the head. And you can see him really upset with the way the helicopter is pacing him so far in the race.
Well, in fact, that's an interesting point, because going back to a Tour of Italy where Francesco Moser beat Laurent Fignon a few years ago, that was at the time that we were racing. Look at that. Bradley Wiggins has gone through with the best time there, 5 seconds faster than Sylvain Chavanel and Kevin Van Emp. No wonder he was concerned, because just to finish that story, Bob, Laurent Fignon had the helicopter filming him from the front, and Francesco Moser had the helicopter filming him from behind, and Moser beat Laurent Fignon by 2.5 minutes in that time trial.
Yes, that was a bit of a disaster for Fignon. He eventually came back to winning the Giro d'Italia, but it was a long time. It was 7 years later before he got a chance to win the Giro again. But Wiggins doing everything he can to beat the time of Sylvain Chavanel, and he's out on a great ride. We saw him going very quickly on the flat and straight sections of the course. Let's see how he can handle the last few corners before the finish line. But Bradley Wiggins on a very good time so far today.
Best new time at half distance for Bradley Wiggins. What I was just going to say, Bob, a few moments ago, just look and take me through his pedaling action there, because he's got a very high cadence.
Great cadence. You can see he's in a perfect position now. The helicopter is moved off to his shoulder, so he doesn't have a direct headwind from the helicopter. If he does lose this time trial by a few seconds, it'll be because he was waving off the helicopter there a couple of times. You can do nothing except pedal as fast as you can, and that was great pedaling there by Bradley Wiggins. And here is Lorenzo Soto a little bit further behind. Wiggins on the start course, and perhaps a little bit slower at the halfway point. Wiggins flying through that 5 seconds faster than Chavanel.
Well, Lorenzetto is a guy who's had a very good start to his season. As we go straight back down to the finishing line once again, this is Jaime Zubeldia. I think a great acquisition by Team Astana to bring this man on board. He's a rider who has finished in the top 15 in the Tour de France on a number of occasions, and he is a man who I think they will count upon at races like the Giro d'Italia and, of course, the Tour de France later in July.
Zubeldia, good rider, brought onto the squad this year from Euskaltel by Johan Brunel, and that is a great find by Johan to bring one of the riders that can go really hard in the mountains and is a very steady performer day in and day out, and he's done a solid time trial, and you can look at the rain just hammering down now at the finish line.
There's only one word to describe the weather here in France for Paris-Nice, and that is nasty. It really is not a lot of fun for these bike riders this afternoon. Out on course now, we're not too far away from the finish line for this man, Bradley Wiggins. Fastest man at 5.3 kilometers. Faster by 5 seconds than Sylvain Chavanel. But Bob, it's all about dosing your effort over the whole distance of the course.
Jumping out of the saddle there to try to re-accelerate, get back up to speed, struggling now in the final closing kilometers of the race. He just has under a kilometer to go before the finish line. Great ride at the halfway point, and let's see if he didn't go out a little bit too quickly. Let's not forget he's a specialist in the very short 4-kilometer in the pursuit on the track, and he's coming into the finishing straightaway now, and we'll see what his time is. A great ride up until halfway for Bradley Wiggins, and it looks to be still struggling to the finish line, putting everything he has into that machine.
Well, 11 minutes and 24 seconds is the time of Sylvain Chavanel on the finishing gate at the moment. Now we're well inside of that for Bradley Wiggins. This is going to slaughter the time of Sylvain Chavanel. He's gone right inside of that new best time by 11 seconds. 11:12 for Bradley Wiggins, and look at the speed. Just, Bob, a fraction inside of 50 kilometers an hour. That's 31.5 miles an hour.
To be able to go 50 kilometers an hour over 30 miles an hour for 10 kilometers, that is fantastic.
Well, that's a great performance by Bradley Wiggins. He's put the bar right up there now for all of the late starters to try and take him out. We'll take a short break, but when we come back, we'll have a closer look at the rider who won this race in 2007, Team Astana's Alberto Contador.
He climbs like no other. I mean, it's like gravity doesn't affect him. You can see it in the pedal stroke. You know, there's no dead spot. He's spinning up the mountain with ease.
Welcome back to the opening time trial stage of the 67th edition of Paris-Nice here in Amilly, France. One rider who might have a bit of extra motivation is Spaniard Alberto Contador. He wasn't allowed to start this race in France last year. Here's more about him.
For the last time in the 94 Tour de France, Alberto Contador now salutes the crowd as the winner of this race.
That, I think, Phil, is the fresh new face of the sport of professional cycling.
A bold move by ASO, the Tour's organizers this year. They have excluded 2/3 of last year's podium, based really just on that Astana name.
It's a sad move that the Tour de France have made.
For Team Astana to miss the Tour de France, it became a silver lining.
Results-wise, it was a great year, but for me, it was an even better feeling that I could prove that our team was the strongest and the best team without needing the Tour de France. After all, everybody except the Tour de France itself started to realize that we normally should have been there.
I thought for sure I would have been at the Tour de France, but the great memories that came from winning the Giro made the Tour de France really just another race. It was much more important for me to win the Giro and the Vuelta the same year than winning the Tour for a second time.
The Tour of Spain was definitely his big goal, and he was the logical favorite, but what he did in the Giro was for me something incredible.
It came as a surprise to me when Johan called me on vacation to inform me I would have to race the Giro. So when I ended up winning, it made it extra special because it was such a surprise.
I think at his age, to be able to win 2 big stage races in 1 year and even more, the Tour, the Giro and the Vuelta in a little bit over a year, is something that is incredible.
Alberto is an incredibly gifted rider, and you just see him as just being a natural guy that comes in there, and of course he's winning.
He climbs like no other. I mean, it's like gravity doesn't affect him. You can see it in pedal stroke. You know, there's no dead spot. He's spinning up the mountain like with ease. He's also very tough mentally, and he really wants to not just to win, but really crush people, and that's always makes a champion.
Going into the Tour this year, I have special motivations after not being able to race last year. So this year, I am determined and prepared. My sight is clearly focused on winning.
Bob, really, the way he won that race 2 years ago, we should have thought and sat up straight away and said, this guy is going to be a great rider.
And he went on to win the Tour de France that year. It was a great ride on the final day of Paris-Nice. He was always close to Ribeline, and finally on the last day, he made a scintillating attack on the last climb and carried that momentum all the way through the finish line. What a great ride, and it heralded him as a new star of an international cycling.
Looking here at a man who made his name in the Tour de France, Sylvain Calzati. But I have to say, Bob, Alberto Contador made his name in Paris-Nice, didn't he, 2 years ago in 2007. And a little bit of something to prove, I think, because this is actually the first time he's been back to French soil to race since he won the Tour de France in 2007.
Well, because of his team affiliation with Astana, they were asked not to do the Tour last year, and that was a real shame. Contador, the defending champion, could not come back. Also, he did the same thing in Paris-Nice when Paris-Nice was not asked to come back in 2008, and that was the start of a pretty bittersweet season for Contador. Of course, he did win the Giro and the Vuelta, but I don't think that's adequate recompense for the man from Spain. Alberto Contador will be looking for some serious revenge later on in the mountain stages of Paris-Nice.
The big, nasty mountain stages of Paris-Nice, which are all stacked up towards the end, and Alberto Contador is also stacked up towards the end of this time trial. He starts 6 riders from the end at around about 3:45 in the afternoon, French local time. This is Rémy Poriol of Team Cofidis, but I have to say, as we go back down to the starting gate, this is a man who is a great rider over the flatlands, Juan Antonio Fletcher. We've just missed the start, actually, of Daniel Martin, and that's a bit of a pity there, Bob, because I think Daniel Martin this year is going to be a young bike rider to follow, because after all, you look at his pedigree. We've got Nicholas Roche, who is the direct son of Stephen Roche, but Dan Martin is his nephew, and I have to say they must have some very good genes in that Roche family, because they're all turning out to be great bike riders.
Well, if you got any of the Stephen Roche genes, the endurance will be there for the Garmin squad. Dan Martin, big things hoped for him later on in the summer. They're going to presumably bring him to the Tour de France after winning some very tough stage races last year as a very young professional. So great pro from Ireland, maybe to carry on the tradition of Roche and, of course, the great Sean Kelly.
Well, just to put it into perspective, Stephen Roche, apart from Eddie Merckx, was the only bike rider in the world to win the Tour de France, the Tour of Italy, and the World Championships in a single season. That really is quite phenomenal, and we'll be watching. I'm sure we'll see Dan Martin a little bit later on. We're here looking at Carsten Kroon, but the time to beat is the time of Bradley Wiggins on the finishing line, and a storming ride by the Brit on Team Garmin Slipstream. 11 minutes and 12 seconds was the time that he set ahead of Sylvain Chavanel, and now in third spot, Kevin van Impe.
There's always one game that tells where you stand. This is one of them.
Sunday, April the 5th, the whole new race begins. The IndyCar Series is now on Versus. 26 of the world's best riders, Tony Kanaan, Danica Patrick and Marco Andretti, look to chase down the 2008 champ, Scott Dixon. The engines start on the 2009 season from the streets of South Florida. It's the Honda Grand Prix at St. Petersburg, Sunday, April the 5th, live at 2 p.m. Eastern. The IndyCar Series is now on Versus. It's a new race. Well, Remy Poriol, I have to say, Bob, putting in rather a fine performance there, coming across the line in third place, only 15 seconds adrift of the time of Bradley Wiggins. Again, I think some of the big names who are going to come down towards the end may well push that bar a little bit higher. Of course, one of the former teammates of Bradley Wiggins, David Miller, a great individual time trialist himself, starts 4th from the end.
Poriol doing a very good ride. This is a young star of the French scene. Big things are hoped for from this man, from the Cofidis squad, and watch for him to have a good Paris-Nice. The French riders always come to this race with a little bit extra motivation, get their season started right, and of course they want to impress the selectors for the Tour de France later in the summer.
Well, that's the standings at the finish at the moment. Bradley Wiggins 12 seconds faster than Sylvain Chavanel, and slotting in there in third place, a great ride by Poriol. Van Impe of Belgium in 4th, and Nicky Terpstra is up there in 5th place. Looking a little bit further down, you can see the gaps are certainly starting to appear. That's almost a half a minute loss by Jaroslav Popovic. Bob, that's why I think this individual time trial on day one is so important for anybody who wants to win Paris-Nice. You're not going to lose a couple of seconds here this afternoon. You could lose yourself a whole chunk of time.
You could lose some big time in 9.3 Ks in the rain early season, and you will jeopardize your ability to win the Paris-Nice overall if you do that. And so Contador, Evans, and of course Frank Schleck will be looking to do a good ride. This could be a chance for Frank Schleck to lose a lot of time. He's not very good in the prologue, especially not in the flat time trials, so he needs to put in a good ride to keep himself in contention.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit though about the route of this year's Paris-Nice. It's resemblant to the route that they put together for the Tour de France in July, because once we've got the first 2 flat stages out of the way, the sprinters are going to have to throw out the sandbags and hang on, because they've put a new climb in La Montagne down towards the end, and its nickname is the Baby Ventoux. I tell you, that is a hard mountaintop finish, Bob, for the month of March. We're only in March.
Well, this is the race to the sun. That's what it's called. Here's Pinotti coming to the finish line, a time trialing champion from Italy. He is on the team Columbia. He's looking to do a good ride. That's a solid effort by Pinotti. He's a stage winner in the Giro d'Italia in the last couple of years, and a good ride here by Pinotti for the team Columbia.
5th for him, you see there, and that's a man who, let's not forget, last year was a winner of the Tour of Ireland. But I have to say, Bob, just thinking about the way they've stacked up this race, there's a lot could happen over the last 3 days of Paris-Nice this year. We've got La Montagne, the Baby Ventoux. Then you've got a very nasty stage through the Provence to finish in Seyon with a climber up the Col de Bourrigaille down towards the end. And of course, the big final, as we saw in 2007, we saw a great turnaround by Alberto Contador. That stage around Nice is a beast.
Very tough stage to finish off Paris-Nice next weekend, and it's the Race to the Sun is the name of it, but I think it's going to be called the Race to the Mountains in this year's edition.
The Race to the Mountains. This is the Race to the Sun, and this is the Race of Truth, the individual time trial. We're looking down onto the shoulders here of Carsten Kroon. All of the riders, I have to say, from Team Saxo Bank will be looking to slot themselves up at the top end of the classification this afternoon, because I think their tactic will be to try and blow this race apart over the next couple of days. Carsten Kroon, you see, good ride by the Dutchman Carsten Kroon coming into the finish line. I would say he's going to finish himself off with a top 20.
Slotting in there in the top half of the field as we finish. He'll be looking for a good ride, and of course his team will be looking to big Jens Voigt a little bit later in the day to do a good ride in the time trial here today. Jens Voigt, a very solid time trialist. Saxo Bank, one of the best teams in the business and having a great year so far.
Well, I have to say that's where we are. Amilly, and the man who leads the race at the moment is Bradley Wiggins of Garmin Slipstream. We'll take a very short break. Welcome back to stage 1 of this year's Paris-Nice, the Race to the Sun in the rain at the moment. This is Vladimir Karpitz of the brand new team Katusha, the team from Russia, precariously taking himself around that corner, Bob. Big bike rider who in the Tour de France in recent years has always been a solid helper.
He's been a solid helper, looking now to be a GC contender. He won the white jersey a few years ago, and Katusha will have him as their overall man for the general classification. Of course, they have a great roster of sprinters, including Robbie McEwen and Big Geert Stegmans, who is here in this race. Geert Stegmans already warm and dry after his time trial, But Karpitz, a great time trialist, looking to set a good tone for the team, and he will be their man they count on later on in the summer for the big stage races.
Juan Antonio Fletcher is a Spanish rider on the Dutch team of Rabobank, and he's a man who we will see later on in the season, of course, in races like Paris-Roubaix and the Ronde van Vlaanderen. This is Dan Martin coming in. He's the Irish road racing champion, a nephew of Steve Stephen Roach, and I'd have to say that's a solid ride for this young man, Bob, who I think a lot of people are tipping this year to go forward to ride for Garmin Slipstream at the Tour de France.
Look at that deficit to Bradley Wiggins. You can get an idea of how fast Wiggins was going. Brutally painful. 9.3 Ks takes a lot out of you when you're going 50 kilometers an hour, and Bradley Wiggins absolutely demolishing the field so far. It's going to be a long time before anybody challenges that time of Wiggins, not including his teammate Dan Martin. 33rd at the moment. He might tumble down a bit further. Dan Martin, a big future star of the sport.
Well, watch out for Dan Martin. I think once we get into the mountains, because that's where he will fly. He was a winner, I think a little bit of a surprise winner when he won himself the Route du Sud, but that announced to us all, as we got a little bit of a picture problem here, that he was going to be a great star for the future. Well, we're trying to stabilize, and as we had a few problems, you may remember, in the Amgen Tour of California, when we're looking at live television and when we're looking at the race conditions, the weather conditions, it's not always easy to keep the signals, the digital signals, locked into place. We'll get straight back to that in a moment when we can, but at the end of the race this afternoon, we've got, starting in last position, Rinaldo Nocentini, just ahead of Cadel Evans, and just after Cadel Evans, Just Postuma, David Miller, Carlos Barredo. Just looking now down onto the shoulders here of Vladimir Karpets, and he's inside the town of Amilly. We're not too far away from Montargis, which is a small town around about 120 miles away from Paris, and after that there are not very many transfers in this year's Paris-Nice, Bob, and I think that's why they've brought it away from the central part of Paris, so the riders don't have to do transfers before the start and after the finish of every stage.
Well, that's one of the most miserable things about bike racing, is when you finish a long, hard race and you have to get in the car and drive a number of kilometers to the next day's start town. Makes it a little bit harder on the legs. You can really get loaded up with lactic acid.
Interesting rider, this Maxime Montfort. Used to ride for Team Cofidis. He was brought across here for Team Columbia, and they've got this man tagged down as possibly a dark horse for a high place in the overall classification. He's a fairly solid individual time trialist, but he's a man who I think will profit from the very hilly nature of this year's Paris-Nice.
Maxime Montfort, one of the new stars of French cycling, and there's such a dearth of great riders from France that they're really hoping for some big things from riders like Pierre Rolland, Maxime Montfort. Interestingly, as we look at Vladimir Karpets out on course, for Montfort, he's left the French peloton. He's come over to Team Columbia, and his hopes are that he'll have a lot more success on a team that maybe is a little bit more international in nature.
Yeah, what a squad, though, Team Columbia High Road have put together, Bob. It's a team that can perform on any kind of terrain. Mountains, flat stages, Belgium, the whole lot. They really have a solid squad.
And they have a great superstar in Mark Cavendish on that team, who can win races at will. We saw him take out a couple of sprint stages in the Tour of California recently. And here is one of our overall contenders, Frank Schleck, Team Saxo Bank. He needs to do a good time trial. He can't lose that much time to the other riders, and it's a long one, 9.3 Ks.
Rolling away, Frank Schleck, the man who is champion of Luxembourg, brother to Andy Schleck, and a great star of Luxembourg cycling. I have to say that that man is out on course, and I'm going to follow him very closely, because in the Amgen Tour of California, Frank Schleck showed us he had the form to win a race like Paris-Nice. We'll take a very short break now, with Wiggins still in at the fastest time at half distance and still in with the fastest time on the finish line. Welcome back. This is the face of Oscar Pereiro, Case d'Espagne, winner of the Tour de France in 2006, and Bob out on the course. He's a man who's making a little bit of a comeback after that very dramatic crash in the Tour.
Broken pelvis after falling off of a ledge in the Tour de France last year on one of the switchback descents, and it was a very tough crash for the man from Spain, Pereiro, on the French-sponsored Spanish team, Case d'Espagne, and we're going to look for some things, great things from Pereiro in this Paris-Nice. He's the leader of that squad, and they're hoping that he can make a good comeback to the sport after a very tough tumble in the Tour de France.
Well, I think just finishing off the thought of Oscar Pereira, he's such a consistent performer in the Tour de France. He's always finishing in around about 10th place, apart from 2006 when he came up with the yellow jersey. Christian Knies coming in there in 16th place. He's lost half a minute. I think that's an important thing to notice, Bob, as we talk about the time trial here. Half a minute is the kind of time that a man looking to win the bike race in Nice at the end of 7 days of racing, that's an awful lot to make up in the mountains.
That shows you how fast the Bradley Wiggins was going. To take a half a minute out of all of these riders is really impressive. He's got a big lead so far. Here's Pierre Rolland out on course. Bradley Wiggins doing doing an absolutely storming ride in the first time trial to start off Paris-Nice. What a great ride by Wiggins, and no one has come close to that. Even riders in the top 10 still about 30 seconds behind.
Well, out on course now, Maxime Montfort for his new team, High Road Columbia, and he will be interesting to follow throughout the whole of this Paris-Nice. Frank Schleck is out on course as well now. It's Oscar Pereira's turn to get out there, and in a couple of moments' time, we should get a chance to see Christian van der Velde getting into the starting gate. He starts at 26 minutes past 3 local time. Van der Velde, I think, Bob, after actually homing his form through the Tour of California, will be looking to put in a solid performance here.
There's the starter from the Quick Step squad, and we can see Pierre Rolland was a rider from B-Box out on course, formerly known as Bouygues Telecom, and this is Jérôme Pinot. He's come across to Quick Step with Sylvain Chavanel, who did a great ride in this time trial. Sylvain Chavanel second place, just 12 seconds behind our leader Bradley Wiggins. And Jérôme Pinot, another French voice, I guess, for Sylvain Chavanel to hear throughout the year. It's nice to have somebody from your home country when you go to a team that's from a different land.
It certainly is, and that's probably the reason why you rode alongside Greg LeMond, isn't it, when he rode for Zed?
Oh, absolutely. He needed to hear one more voice from America, especially a California accent.
Carpet's getting his way around that corner nice and gingerly. But just to finish off, Bob, I think it's important to see how Christian van der Velde is going to ride. After all, the important thing about Christian van der Velde is he is a man now who's changed his whole view on how he rides. He was a domestique for Lance Armstrong, a team helper on US Postal Service. Now, all of a sudden, finishing 4th in the Tour de France, he has to come out and race as a leader in events like this.
Yes, a lot more pressure. The expectation is that he'll be competitive throughout the year, and Christian van der Velde needs to do a good ride today to set the tone for the rest of his Paris-Nice. He had a good ride in the Tour of California, a little bit quieter perhaps than he might have hoped for, but he has a great chance now to do something very special, and his teammate Bradley Wiggins leading the event.
This is a solid performance by Vladimir Carpets. It's not going to beat Bradley Wiggins just yet, but this is an indication that Carpets has got great form this season, and he wants to show it off here in Paris-Nice. He's going to finish just inside the time of Rémi Poriol. Well, just exactly the same time as Rémi Poriol. In fact, third best on the day at the moment for Vladimir Carpets.
Well, how do you eke out 1 kilometer per hour faster like Bradley Wiggins did against a man like Vladimir Carpets throughout the course? That's an impressive ride.
Just hanging out of the car there. In fact, the team manager was one of the great team managers, one of the great bike riders of his time, and that was I've forgotten his name, Bob. That was
Dmitry Konishev.
Yes. The first rider to win a stage in the Tour de France from Russia. Standings at the finish line there. Still Bradley Wiggins setting the benchmark extremely high for everybody else.
Pierre Rolland out on course. Dmitry Konishev, a great story. He was the first Russian rider to win a stage of the Tour de France. I saw him do that, and the field powerless to stop him. And he has been followed by a lot of great Russian bike racers, and Vladimir Carpets under his charge now at Katusha. A good story to follow throughout the season. They'll be invited to the Tour de France a little bit later in the summer. They are now a full-fledged Pro Tour team after being a continental team called Tinkoff the last couple of years, and they've had great success, and now have hired a bunch of really great riders, including Vladimir Carpets.
Yes, I think Konishev is a man who is still very motivated about the sport of professional cycling. He actually raced till he reached his 40th birthday. This is Rolland of Bouygues Telecom coming into the finish line. An average time for him, but still big names to come in the opening stage of Paris-Nice here. Names like Cadel Evans, David Miller, Alberto Contador, Sammy Sanchez, of course, the Spanish rider who is the current Olympic gold medalist. Wiggins still at the top of the leaderboard with 11 minutes and 12 seconds. Very difficult time to beat. The push to the NHL playoffs is on Versus. On March 17th, there's always one game that tells a team if they're fast enough, tough enough, and hungry enough to hang with the best. This is that game. Flyers, Red Wings, March the 17th at 7:30 Eastern, right here on Versus. Going through the half-distance point there, the man who was fastest at 5.3 kilometers, Bradley Wiggins, and just going through there, we haven't got the time filtering through yet, is Oscar Pereira, Bob, using all of the road.
Pushing it a little bit through that corner, trying to get the maximum he can out of this time trial to start off Paris-Nice. 9.3 Ks, looking a little bit further down the course, and that is one of the big stars of Belgian cycling, Philippe Gilbert. Won Het Volk last year. He was blanked out so far this year. but he's looking to do a good Paris-Nice. He's come over to the Lotto squad in the hopes that he'll be a little bit more competitive in the big classics. He wants to win the race that all Belgians dream of, the Tour of Flanders.
Well, that's amazing, Bob, because I've always regarded Philippe Gilbert as a man for the Flanders classics, the Wallon, the Ardennes classics, like Flèche Wallonne, the Liège-Bastogne-Liège. But this year he's come out and said he wants to ride the Tour of Flanders. He wants to win the race that all Belgians want to perform in.
That would be the Ronde van Vlaanderen, and that is the Super Bowl of Belgian cycling. Something like 500,000 fans packing each little climb out on the race course, on the cobbled climbs, the Muurs that they call them in Flemish, and that is the Tour of Flanders. And a little bit later in the season, we'll be bringing you all of that action. And this man right here has come over to a great squad for the classics, Silence Lotto team. They also have a very solid GC man, overall contender for the Tour de France in Cadel Evans, who we'll see in just a few minutes' time in the time trial at Paris-Nice.
Yeah, Gilbert rode for many, many years for the Française de Jeux team from France, and he gave him a great going-away present at the end of last season when he won them the one-day classic from Paris to Tours. And yeah, let's not forget that we are right on Cyclism Sundays once again. We're on every Sunday throughout the season, bringing all the highlights. And although you can't hear the voice of Senor Phil Liggett at the moment, he will be joining us later in the season. He's currently sunning himself in South Africa.
Don Filippo Ligato will be back with us in just a little while. See Maxime Montfort coming to the finish line. This is a good ride. Perhaps this transfer over to a more international team has done him good. He will try to slip into the top 10 on the individual time trial to start off Paris-Nice.
Well, that's a good performance there. Just see how quickly they slip away. 13th time for Montfort, losing himself 24 seconds to Bradley Wiggins. But I don't think it's any secret, is it, Bob, that Bradley Wiggins, I think, will lose himself a few moments of time once we get down to the last 3 or 4 days of this year's Paris-Nice, because we're looking at 4 mountain stages in this year's Paris-Nice.
And here is Marcus Fothen, one of the contenders for the white jersey a couple of years ago in the Tour de France. He was on the beleaguered Gerald Steiner squad last year, and now he's come over to Milram to try to put away some of those bad memories perhaps that Gerald Steiner went through with Cole and, of course, Stefan Schumacher in last year's Tour.
Philippe Gilbert, he's going to use this race to fine-tune himself for races like Milan-San Remo, which is going to be up in a couple of weeks' time, and of course for the Ronde van Vlaanderen. This is the finish of Frank Schleck, and I thought you were telling me, Bob, that his time trialing ability was not all that good. This is a solid performance by Frank Schleck.
This is much better than expected. He'll fall away a little bit from the leaderboard, but this is a very good ride, and this bodes well for Frank Schleck throughout the rest of Paris-Nice. 18th on the day, 30 seconds around about slower than Wiggins, but he'll take a lot of that time back in the mountains. He is one of the best climbers in the business.
Well, that's the important thing to remember. Although he's lost himself about 28 seconds on Bradley Wiggins, the race is won on the addition of time on every day. Now, Frank Schleck will gain himself time once we get into the mountains. And riders like Bradley Wiggins are specialists at this very special discipline in the sport, the individual time trial. But they will fade away and they'll lose huge chunks of time in the mountains. So the time of Frank Schleck is important when you compare it to the other overall winning contenders, men like Contador. You have to look at what Contador is going to do in this time trial, and I think if Frank Schleck only loses 4 or 5 seconds to a man like Contador, he's going to come out of this race quite happy.
Absolutely. Here is the finish of Jussi Vikinen from the FDJ squad. Pretty decent time by Vikinen. We see a lot of the northern riders spend a lot of time riding by themselves, and of course that makes them very good time trialists.
It certainly does. He's going to look at a top 20 position there, losing himself again 28 seconds. It seems, Bob, a lot of riders here have lost themselves around about the 30-minute mark, but we've still got some massive big names to come. And of course, we're all waiting for Alberto Contador, the winner of the 2007 Tour de France, the winner of the Tour of Italy, and of course the winner of the Tour of Spain last year, to come into the starting gate. Welcome back and welcome to the finish of Oscar Pereiro coming into the finish line here in Amilly, stage 1 of Paris-Nice this year. And this man is on a comeback as well, because he had a nasty crash last year in the Tour de France, falling down a mountain as we went across to the roads of the Alps into Italy. 43rd time for him, but I think what's more important, Bob, is how he performs himself when we get into the big mountains.
A steady ride there for Pereiro, and he'll look to continue to improve throughout the week here as we hopefully get some warmer temperatures for the riders. A very wet, windy, soggy day. This is Philippe Gilbert out on the race course. It's not dried out one bit, although it does seem as if the rain has slowed down a little bit.
Well, Gilbert doesn't care. He's a man from the north, a man from Belgium, and he's well ready for these kind of conditions. These are the kind of conditions that he'll face up to in races like Paris-Roubaix and, of course, the Ronde van Vlaanderen, the Tour of Flanders, which he's set as one of his main goals for this year's season. That's one of the reasons why he switched across from Française des Jeux, the team where he turned professional a couple of years ago, well back in 2003. Stayed with that French team for an awful long time before finally deciding, I want to go to Belgium because I want to win a big Belgian classic. This is the darling of France. This is the man who has worn the yellow jersey in the Tour de France for 10 days in succession, only to have it ripped off his shoulders by a certain Lance Armstrong. Thomas Voeckler.
Thomas Voeckler out on the race course now. We always get lots of images from Voeckler because of the way he was in the Tour de France, and it gave the French something to cheer about recently. They have not had a lot of success in the Tour de France, but he had the yellow jersey for a number of days just a few years ago in the Tour, so he'll always be a big star of French TV throughout his career.
I have to say, though, Bob, in the last couple of seasons, Voeckler has matured as a bike rider. He's become a much more solid performer, much more consistent performer, which is why I think a race like Paris-Nice really suits that man from B-Box Bouygues Telecom.
Well, you look at a rider like Sylvain Chavanel, a little bit in the same boat as the man from Bouygues, B-Box, and a big hope of French cycling and a lot of pressure on your shoulders. Here's Jérôme Pinot coming to the finish line, teammates with Chavanel, and not a bad ride for Pinot, and shows that the morale is pretty good to start the year out for the two men from France on the Quick-Step team.
They moved across to Team Quick-Step, maybe to try and change the mode of modus operandi, I have to say, at Team Quick-Step, because I think what they'll be looking forward to now is Sylvain Chavanel developing as an overall contender. Not too far away from the finish line, as we look at Philippe Gilbert, there should be the finish of Christian Vande Velde, because he should be the next man to come in. Now, we've got no time checks out on the course at all about how Christian Vande Velde has been doing, but I'd have to say he should be putting in a rock-solid performance, because I'm expecting a good Paris-Nice out of Vande Velde this season.
Christian Vande Velde had a great time trial to finish off the Tour de France last year that moved him up into 4th place overall after everything was all said and done and the dust settled. And Christian Vande Velde, a big star and an overall contender for the Tour de France in July.
Well, a man who's had a great start to the season. We've seen him very early on in the Tour Down Under. David Moncoutier, winner of 2 stages in the Tour de France, Bob. He seems to have had a kick start to his career.
Moncoutier, I think they told him that if he didn't get into a little bit more of a hurry, that he was going to get fired from his Cofidis squad. And he has been a 2-time stage winner in the Tour de France in the past, and he needs to do a good ride in Paris-Nice. It heralded him as a great rider in the future. And here is Christian Vande Velde coming to the finish line.
Well, Vande Velde, I really don't understand what's gone wrong here, Bob, because he's a long way off the marker. We're looking at a top 120th position for Christian Vande Velde. Either he didn't want to go out too hard and take the pressure off his shoulders here this afternoon, or he's had an incident out on the course.
Perhaps a crash or a flat tire out on the race course for Christian
you can
Vande
see it
Velde.
just on his thigh there, Bob. He's ripped himself to pieces. Look at the shoulder there, open and blooded, and of course you can see on his thigh as well. He was obviously, and it's on the right-hand side there, Bob. It was that right-hand bend, I'm absolutely certain, where a couple of years ago his teammate crashed.
Well, that is a tough tumble for Christian Vande Velde and a very tough way to start any race, to have a hard crash there. Obviously he was going for it and fell down and had a very slow time as a result of that.
Roman Kreuziger is a name that was thrown up as a couple of years ago in Paris-Nice. He went on to win the Tour of Switzerland, but he put in a very solid time trial performance. I think 2nd on the prologue, Bob?
2nd behind a couple of other superstars there. Roman Kreuziger, he also won the Tour of Switzerland last summer, so he is one of the big stars of international cycling, but we didn't know anything about him when he got 2nd place in Paris-Nice a couple of years ago, but he's most certainly made himself a famous bike racer in the meantime.
Looking here at Philippe Gilbert, a man for the classics, a man for the one-day races here, just trying to put himself in a solid performance at 300 meters to go. But the big man for Team Silence Lotto, of course, has to be Cadel Evans, who finished 2nd overall in the Tour de France and had all of Australia up until about 3 o'clock in the morning when they thought he was going to win the Tour in the final time trial, but he never really looked comfortable. And I'm sure that that crash that he had early on in the Tour actually had a lot more consequences than we ever heard about.
Gilbert coming to the finish line, 66th place at the moment. He'll go down a little little bit further than that. Never known as a time trialing specialist, unlike his teammate Cadel Evans. Cadel Evans maybe also a little bit of the pressure of leading the Tour getting to Cadel Evans last summer.
Absolutely certain that's the case. That is David Moncoutier out on course. He had a very good win this year in the Tour of the Mediterranean. I think it was to the top of the Montferrand, a very difficult climb not too far outside of Toulon, which is a big French naval base in the southern part of France, and not too far away from where we'll be going in a couple of days' time. Not too far for the start gate now should be big Jens Voigt, a man who we can always talk about at the start of any season.
Well, Jens Voigt has won a lot of these smaller stage races to start the year off. It's a perfect event for him. He's never going to be a man for the big tours like the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France. He will always win stages there, but this is his specialty. This is his best chance to shine, and when you give Jens Voigt a little bit of an opportunity, he goes for it, he attacks. He's a great rider to watch and a great rider to get quotes from. He is a walking, talking quote machine. Jens Voigt is the man. We love talking to him at any race he participates in.
Well, he was the winner last year of the Criterium International, which is a race we'll be covering on Versus in a couple of weeks' time, and a race that he reckons falls completely and utterly into his style of racing. You've got a road race, you've got a short mountain race, and then you've got an individual time trial. Everything thrown into 48 hours. Well, this is Cyril Lemoine coming up to the line, and that's not a bad performance by this rider here from Skill as well. He's not going to beat Bradley Wiggins, but he's setting the benchmark very high in the top performers here, because that is a 5th place finish for him. Well, as we look at this rider, Cyril Lemoine, coming into the finish line, we're now getting down to the creme de la creme, and very shortly all of the big names will start to come out. Contador, David Miller and Cadel Evans. Well, there we're just catching the start of Alberto Contador, the winner of the last 3 Grand Tours, Bob, that he has participated in, racing once again on French soil, and I think we're going to see a lot of special action from Alberto Contador this week.
Absolutely. Contador, the winner of the Tour de France in 07, the winner of the Giro d'Italia and the Vuelta a España last year, probably the best stage racer in the business. That's not including the return to cycling of Lance Armstrong, his own teammate. That story will continue to play out, and it'll be great to follow throughout the year.
Well, he is chasing the champion of Spain in the individual time trial on the road, and this is a man that a few years ago people were saying is going to be the next star of Spanish cycling. That was before the birth of Alberto Contador on the scene in 2007. Luis Leon Sanchez is a great individual time trialist, and as you can see here, he's donned the uniform of the time trial champion of his country. Carlos Barredo is a man we've seen already perform this year in the Amgen Tour of California. He's a very aggressive bike rider, and he's a man to look out for in the overall context of Paris-Nice this season.
Barely losing out, Barredo, in a stage win in last year's Tour, but this man did not lose out. Won a stage for himself in the Tour de France last year. A little bit more gradual trajectory in his career, Luis Leon Sanchez, than Alberto Contador, but great things are hoped from this man, from his team, K d'Epargne. Great time trialist, solid climber, and look at that machine that he's riding. About as aerodynamic as you can get. And when we talk about the aerodynamic time trial position, we want to be low and narrow and absolutely flying down the road, closing in on speeds of 50-55 kilometers an hour on this stretch of road.
That's absolutely right. The average speed of David Miller, in fact, at the moment is 49.8 kilometers an hour. This is Nicolas Vaugondi, a French national road racing champion, and he's drifted away a fraction. Getting into the start gate now, I would expect to see David Miller from Garmin Slipstream, and here he is, a former world time trial champion. He hasn't had very much success over the last couple of seasons. He's a team captain here on Garmin Slipstream, but Bob, he's now been given the mantle of team leader, and with the crash of Christian van der Velde, a lot of pressure on the shoulders of Miller.
David Miller coming out specifically trying to prepare himself for this 9.3 kilometer effort. His teammate is leading the event, Bradley Wiggins. Tony Colombe coming in with the fast time on the Katusha squad. He used to be on the team of Astana last year. He's a good star of the cycling, and that is a very good ride. And third fastest, just 12.7 seconds behind Bradley Wiggins. David Miller trying to challenge that time of his own teammate, Bradley Wiggins, a little bit later, and as he gets to the finish line.
Same time there as Sylvain Chavanel, so a lot of riders locking in a long way behind Bradley Wiggins. There's not many men left in this race here this afternoon can beat him. Number 51, that's Phil Liggett's favorite number, a number he believes brings a lot of riders a lot of luck in the sport of professional cycling. Alberto Contador, Bob, was looking pretty scary.
Right there on the edge of the road, just put his head down for a moment, drifted off, and hopefully he'll be able to keep it on course throughout the rest of the day. Jos Postuma, Rabobank rider, and here is David David Miller out on course. Look at that aero position. Head down, arms forward, very narrow, and the pedals just absolutely spinning a gear there, and David Miller flying down the road at the moment.
Well, you were talking, Bob, about aerodynamics. A lot of riders nowadays invest a lot of time, a lot of money in the United States to get themselves into wind tunnels, to try and get themselves into an aerodynamic position as possible. Now, the problem is you've got to get yourself an aero position, but you've got to still be able to produce the energy and the power to go forward quickly.
Well, that's the compromise, and all of the riders try to find the perfect balance of that. Thomas Voeckler coming to the finish line, and he is going to try to get within the top 30, 24th fastest at the moment, and he will finish a long ways down from our leader, Bradley Wiggins.
Second overall in the Tour de France last year, the hopes of a continent, Australia, on his shoulders. Cadel Evans now looking down the line here at the preparation to try and win the Tour de France this year as he pulls away. And that, to me, Bob, I know he had some injury problems in the early part of this season. His training was a little bit behind schedule in January when I met him at the Tour Down Under, but here that looked like a face of a man who's concentrated.
Very determined face of Cadel Evans to start out the time trial and start out Paris-Nice. He had a great stage win here last year, and that showed that he was on good form, and he carried that throughout the rest of the year, and it carried him to second place in the Tour de France, although I think perhaps a little bit of a disappointment, maybe his best chance to win that he will ever have.
Well, I have to say he didn't take any prisoners going around that corner there, because he used all of the road there, and that's an indication that he's going to take the risks in this individual time trial here this afternoon. Got some heavy gloves on the front, Bob. That's an indication of how the weather here is at Amilly, just about 120 miles away from France. The last man to start, he was second overall last year, Ronaldo Nocentini. He's in great form this season because we've already seen him get himself a stage victory in Pasadena in the Amgen Tour of California.
Right around the Rose Bowl, a great little breakaway. Nocentini had a pretty tough crash in the rain in the Tour of California early. He didn't have a great GC, but he continued to improve throughout that event, and he did win himself a stage. And there is the man of the hour, and that is Alberto Contador trying to do a good prologue. Let's not forget Frank Schleck put in a solid ride about 29 seconds behind Bradley Wiggins and slotted himself into the top 20. Contador will take a close look at that and want to match at least that time of Frank Schleck as he gets the rest of the way through this time trial.
It's Contador's second big race of the season. He started off in Portugal with the Tour of the Algarve, and there he accompanied on the big Etapa Arena, the big mountaintop finish, and then he dominated in the individual time trial on stage 4. Bob, that is a phenomenal position looking at Contador. Here's a man who a couple of years ago could not ride a time trial, but all of a sudden he's developed this ability. He's learned.
Oh, absolutely. He's always been a great climber from the first pedal stroke he ever took as a professional, and what he's had to work on is his time trialing, and it's been a great trajectory to watch him improve that. And he's got a very aerodynamic position. He's put a lot of time and effort into, like you said, the wind tunnel testing. Let's see how he can make it through this corner. We have a feeling that this is where Christian Vande Velde went down a little bit earlier in the race. Contador through there safely and back up to speed, kicking that back up to about 52 kilometers an hour, and this is the finish of Kreuziger.
Well, Kreuziger was a surprise when he finished second in the prologue of Paris-Nice a couple of years ago, but this is no surprise at all for the man who last year was second overall in the Tour of Romandy and the winner of the Tour of Switzerland because of his time trialing ability. He's going to lodge himself right up there in 18th place. He's lost 26 seconds. Well, the next man to come in could be a good performance. That's Tony Martin of Team High Road Colombia. He's a man who last year, Bob, was very dominant in a number of individual time trials, and he could create the surprise. He's looking to beat Bradley Wiggins, who has stood as the best time for almost an hour now. Here's Martin, and it's going to be fairly close indeed. He's going to look at a time of 11:12 as Martin is looking up every now and again to the finish line. He knows the time to beat is that of Wiggins, and he's not going to do it on this occasion. It is so close, but Tony Martin has laid down the rules there for Team Colombia. Second for him. He's lost himself just 4.5 seconds. A great ride by him. So at the moment, we're now looking at Bradley Wiggins being the fastest rider. We're now looking at Tony Martin being second, and out on course, there's some very big names, including Cadel Evans. Well, there is the standings at the moment. Wiggins, Tony Martin and Sylvain Chavanel, but looking to get himself to half distance as fast as possible is Alberto Contador, Team Astana. Bob, it must be with a little bit of anger in his mind that he's riding this time trial this afternoon, because his team, the winners of the Tour de France in 2007, excluded from Paris-Nice and, of course, from the Tour de France last year. This is the arrival of Jens Voigt. Look at this battle. He's fighting his machine. He's all over. He wants to rip the handlebars off.
You get the sense that he's one of the most aggressive riders we've ever seen. Trying to get into there in the top 10. He'll just be ninth at the moment. Good ride by big Jens Voigt. Always a contender on the early season and in the big bike races.
You've got to love Jens Voigt. He's the man who will go out from the very start of the season and battle right the way through until October. And whenever there's a possibility of a breakaway, he's never very far away. This is Cadel Evans. Bob, I was just looking at his position a few moments ago, and we were talking about how important it is to get the body as aerodynamic as possible. But Cadel Evans, to me, seems to sit up quite a lot, which means he's going to take a lot of wind on his chest, and that's not necessarily a good aero position to be in.
Well, it doesn't look as aero as some of the other riders, including David Miller, Bradley Wiggins, Alberto Contador has done a lot of work. Cadel Evans, to his credit, has done a tremendous amount of work in the wind tunnel also, trying to get just as aerodynamic as possible. Of course, you have to strike a balance between being able to maneuver the machine and having good respiration and getting a lot of air into the lungs, but it seems like his head is a lot higher up from where his bars are, and that scoops up a lot of air and is a lot more resistant in the aerodynamic position. And you can see how much lower Contador is. He is also in the same mode, a bit of a climber, great in the mountains, trying to improve in the time trial.
But the unfortunate thing is, Bob, what you have to do, you've got to keep the power, and that's obviously what Cadel Evans has done. He's got himself to get into the position of being as aerodynamic as he can make his body. Well, he has retained an awful lot of power. Contador around the corners there. This is Sanchez, Luis Leon Sanchez. This is a great time as well by Sanchez. He's looking to knock Bradley Wiggins off the top end of the leaderboard, and he's all over the machine. It really could well be just a little bit too far for Luis Leon Sanchez as he goes into second position again. Fast times, Bob, coming in.
Sanchez, a great ride. I think the course might be drying out just a little bit, especially on the backside of the course. Luis Leon Sanchez, this is a very good ride. Just a tiny little bit less than 2 seconds slower than Bradley Wiggins, and that puts him into second place on general classification at the moment.
With Tony Martin there in third. Just looking here at Alberto Contador, just to put into perspective, Bob, Paris-Nice as a race of 8 days of racing. We're starting now on Sunday. We don't finish till next Sunday, but have a check at this time right now, because this is Alberto Contador coming into the finishing straight. He's looking at the time of Bradley Wiggins here. This is a man who's a climber. This is a man who's looking to win Paris-Nice in the mountains down towards the end of this bike race, and he's throwing down the gauntlet with this performance as Contador comes up to the finishing line. He's looking to knock Wiggins off the top spot, and he's done it by 7.5 seconds. Alberto Contador at 50.3 kilometers an hour, Bob.
Wow, a storming ride by Contador, the first man to average more than 50 kilometers an hour. That's going to be a very tough time to beat. Also, that's going to put fear into the hearts of every man that wants to win Paris-Nice. A great ride by the leader of Astana, and that is Alberto Contador at his very best.
Well, there is the new standings. Eventually, they are still provisional, but I am blown away by that performance by Alberto Contador. 11.05, a massive beating of Bradley Wiggins, and look at the gaps that are starting to appear now. If you thought that this man was coming here to play, I think he's just told us he's not.
Well, David Miller, Alan Course, maybe the only man between the men who haven't finished and Alberto Contador to have a chance to take that away. 1K to go for David Miller. I have a feeling that this is a very good ride that David Miller is putting in as well.
Well, theoretically, over the last kilometer, he should cover it in around about 1 minute and 10 seconds. He'll be slowed down a fraction because of the corners, but he will now have heard in his ear, the radio that he'll have in his ear, in his helmet there, the time that he has to beat, and it's the time of Alberto Contador around that corner very quickly. Bob, once again up to speed. You've got to slow down, maneuver the corner properly, make sure you don't lose too much impetus, and then get back onto course.
Here is Carlos Barredo coming to the finish line. He is doing a pretty good ride, looking to be into the top 20. He will get nowhere near the time, however, of Alberto Contador. 32 seconds down in 20th place. A decent ride by Barredo, but nothing like what Contador did.
Well, he wasn't happy with that because he's looking, I think, to ride well in the overall perspective of Paris-Nice here this afternoon, but they will all now be very shocked by the performance of Alberto Contador. Last man on the road, Rinaldo Nocentini, second overall overall last year. And Bob, pretty tough, isn't it, to ride last man, especially when you've got those big names going in front of you?
Oh, of course, Luis Leon Sanchez and Alberto Contador into the finish line. This is a solid ride by David Miller, trying to get a little bit faster than his teammate Bradley Wiggins. That's not going to happen, and quite a few seconds behind our leader, Alberto Contador.
Well, Miller has put in a fine performance there, only overshadowed by the performance of his own teammate and, of course, of Contador. Fifth for Miller, losing 14 seconds. Really, I have to say, out on the course, there is only one possible chance left to beat Alberto Contador, and that's Cadel Evans. And Bob, I think I'm going to bet my bottom dollar that Cadel can't do it today.
Not quite as fast as Contador perhaps, but the time will tell. We'll have to see exactly how fast that Cadel Evans is able to go against his old rival and Alberto Contador. What a great ride by Contador. When you put the pressure on a great champion, they rise to the occasion, and that is the case with Alberto Contador in today's time trial.
And the question is, what would Christian Vande Velde have done if he hadn't gone down in one of those corners? Because I'm certain that Christian Vande Velde would have gone faster than David Miller, because I saw him riding well in the Amgen Tour of California. I think he used that event to hone himself here for Paris-Nice, and he just overcooked it in one corner.
Well, Contador has sent a powerful message to the organizers of this event as we see Jos Postuma finish up a good ride, trying to get into the top 10 by Postuma, 6th fastest. But I think Contador came in with a little bit extra incentive. Not allowed to start, not allowed to defend his title in Paris-Nice last year. He came out emphatically saying, I am the man, I deserve to be here, watch how fast I'm able to go.
Well, I think we've just been given that indication. He certainly is welcoming himself back into France and, of course, back into Paris-Nice, the winner in 2007. Only two men left to finish now. Rinaldo Nocentini starting last. Where's number one? Because he was the highest placed finisher last year, second overall defending champion David Rebellin, riding for an Italian team, has opted to ride a different race this year in preparation for Milano Sanremo. He's riding in Tirreno Adriatico across the waters from here now. Cadel Evans should not be too far away from finishing. And there for Nocentini is the Flamme Rouge, the red kite, so he's around about a minute and 10 seconds away from the finish line.
He will have a little bit to go. We should be seeing Cadel Evans coming into the finishing straightaway. If we have a chance to look around the corner here, Cadel Evans should have gotten to the finish line, and here he comes. A decent time, but nothing like what we saw both Frank Schleck and Alberto Contador capable of doing. He's going to tumble a ways down from the leaderboard right now with this effort by Evans.
Well, what you have to understand, it's an extremely long season. Cadel Evans stopping the clock there in 20th position. Cadel's goal is to win the Tour de France, and he wants to have his form honed for maybe the month of May and July. A little bit further down the season, he's had a little niggly knee problem throughout the winter, which has delayed his preparation in Australia, but now he's on the road to July, and I think that goes to indicate that the form is not quite right for Cadel Evans here this afternoon. But one man left to go, Rinaldo Nocentini, and I have to say, Bob, I think the move of Alberto Contador is going to stay right up there, because Nocentini has hardly ever in his career ridden a very solid time trial.
It will be an absolute miracle if Nocentini can get anywhere near the time of Alberto Contador. He's just got a few hundred meters to go. Let's see where he's at. Doing a decent time. He'll try to get into the top 20 there, but he'll fall a long ways from the stomping ride that Contador put in the very first stage of Paris-Nice this year, the time trial.
Well, not a bad ride, actually, for Nocentini. He's going to stop the clock, Bob, inside of the top 30, I think, with that performance. 27th. He's lost 34 seconds on the day here this afternoon, but it's all really about Alberto Contador. What a phenomenal performance. We didn't get the time check through at half distance, but I'd have to say he would have been fastest at 5.3 kilometers and fastest at the finish line. He came out of that starting block with a vengeance.
It's unbelievable the time he put into the specialists in this discipline, Wiggins and Tony Martin and David Miller. What a great ride by Alberto Contador.
Well, this is the performance of Alberto Contador here this afternoon. He came out, he's had a win so far this season in the Tour of the Algarve, but this is the start of his campaign, the route to the Tour de France in July, and Alberto Contador here has laid the gauntlet down for everybody this year to say, I'm the strong man on the block. I wonder what his teammate Lance Armstrong is thinking about this strong performance in the individual time trial. Lance himself says that's the best man in the world. He knocked Bradley Wiggins off the top spot. Wiggins had led for an awful long time here this afternoon, a time that we thought was possibly not anybody's sights to rival, as Wiggins came in and ends the day in second place in the opening prologue, the opening time trial of Paris-Nice here this afternoon. So here's confirmation of that great ride by Alberto Contador. He leads home Bradley Wiggins and Luis Leon Sanchez, with David Miller creeping into the top 5. A little bit further down, 6th place for Postuma and Chabanel for France, riding solidly in 7th, and Rémi Poriol of France making the top 10. Looking a little bit further down, I have to say that Jens Voigt is a solid performer as always. Watch out for him later on in the week. And Cadel Evans in 19th place is looking for his form, I would think, further down the road. And sadly, after that accident there, Christian van der Velde 142nd at 1 minute and 15 seconds. Well, this man certainly put in an emphatic performance here in the individual time trial, and I have to say, just to remind you, that this man was only the 5th professional bike rider in the world to win all 3 Grand Tours, up alongside names like Bernard Hinault, who's not too far away from him here on the podium, and of course Eddie Merckx himself. But Bob, that was special.
Absolutely stomping ride in the time trial to start Paris-Nice off. This man, you can see how fit he is. I haven't seen him look this fit since the Tour de France 2 years ago, and there's a thump to the chest and a pistola for the crowd. This man has come for revenge, and a revenge-minded bike racer is a very dangerous beast.
I just hope that when he gets out onto the open road, they'll have a jersey that fits him, because that one is a little bit too large, and that may well run around in the wind. Bob, I think that performance in the individual time trial bodes well for what's going to be an exciting Paris-Nice, and we're going to see some great racing in the mountains.
Well, his rivals will be sent to their hotel rooms overnight, shaking their heads in fear, and if he can time trial that well, it kind of scares anybody else to see how good he's going to be climbing in a few days' time. When we get into the big mountain climbs of Paris-Nice, I think that it's going to be very tough for anybody to come anywhere near and try to touch the type of form that he's already showing. Alberto Contador, he is the man of the hour in Paris-Nice.
Great win there by Alberto Contador, but don't forget to log on to our website this week, because every day if you go to versus.com, you'll find daily highlights of every individual stage of this week's Paris-Nice. And of course, don't forget, next week on Sunday at 5 p.m. we will show stage 8 as well as highlights of the whole week. And of course, do log on to our website, because there's an awful lot of information, behind the scenes features, articles, and of course a full schedule of what we will be covering this year on Versus, when the cycling season really starts to get hot. So until next week and the final of Paris-Nice, I'm Paul Sherwen on behalf of Bob Roll saying bye for now.